Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. Again, Saturday live study. We are still in Module 1. We'll be discussing kinetic chains today. A pretty important concept in resistance training because of some issues that we'll discuss. But when we talk about kinetic chains, it's really important for exercise performance. And so that's why we have it in here. It's only a couple of slides on here, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. As always, you can comment as you're watching this video. If you got any questions, you can always reach out and contact me. So again, this is page 21 in the workbook. Again, we are still on module 1. Is everybody with me right now? Give me a thumbs up. Yes. All right, guys. And again, just last week, we finished up with a torque, range of motion, and that's what really leads us now into a little bit more of the exercise performance sort of variables that we look at. And so that's why we now talk about kinetic chains. Now you'll hear the term kinetic chain. You'll also hear a term known as kinematic chain. Now, in the sort of the field of kinesiology and in biomechanics, they are two different terms. They do describe two different concepts. For us as personal trainers, in a sense, you could use either one of them, but we generally kind of gear ourselves towards the use of kinetic chains. Okay. So again, if you do see something and you're watching YouTube or whatever, and they talk about kinematic chains, you'll understand that they're somewhat similar, but we like to stay with the verbiage, the terminology, kinetic chains. And what are kinetic chains? Well, they're simply the combination of several successfully arranged joints constituting a complex motor system. In other words, if you're a human and you got two arms and two legs, your kinetic chains are basically your arms or your legs. Now, that's a very general statement, but for the most part, when it comes to performing exercises, that's really what we're concerned with. Movements that involve our arms, right? Every exercise you can think of that involves your arms, and all the exercises that involve your legs. Okay, so again, a kinetic chain is simply a limb, a joint, a limb, a joint, right? Successively down to the end of your foot or to the end of your hand. I hope that makes sense. So, and I have it right here. A kinetic chain is all the limbs and joints directly involved in a particular movement. Now, just stick with me on the academic part of this because it's going to be real easy when we talk about actual exercises. Okay. So, dumbbell curls, I give you this example. The kinetic chain would include the shoulder, the upper arm. See how I'm going successively? I start here with a joint, limb, right? That's your humerus, that's your humeral bone, right? And then there's another joint, your elbow joint, and then there's another body segment. Now, this body segment, your forearm, actually has two bones. So that's why generally when we talk about kinetic chains, we don't talk about bones, right? This bone and this, well, there's two bones here. So we talk about a body segment. So between the elbow and the wrist, you have your forearm. That's just a body segment. And then you have a joint, right? And you have your wrist joint, and then you have your hand. Now, technically, if you wanted to, when we talk about the dumbbell curl, I guess you could say, well, that's one joint, the wrist, and then you got like the palm of your hand, right? And then you got all these joints right here on your fingers. We don't do that. When we're holding a dumbbell, we consider the hand to be a single, just a single actual complex. We don't break it up into the fingers. Does that make sense, everybody? So again, here's your example. Dumbbell curl, shoulder, upper arm, elbow, forearm, wrist, hand. That is the kinetic chain that we're talking about when we're doing dumbbell curls. Now, arguably, and if somebody said this to me, I would not disagree with them, but you could technically say that not just the shoulder joint or the glenohumeral anatomical joint itself, but you technically could say that the scapula or the backbone kind of is almost a part of it as well. Um, we don't really use that as a viable part of the kinetic chain. Why? Because the scapula essentially stays in place and acts as a stabilizing component again for the shoulder joint. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? Your scapula at the end of the scapula has the glenoid process. That's the little cup that your shoulder, your humeral head fits into, right? And that's your shoulder joint. So you got your shoulder joint, but then you have the actual scapula. Okay, so the scapula, your backbone, generally stays in a static position while you're moving your elbow. So we talk about the joint, the shoulder joint, and the upper arm, and I'm probably overdoing it for you, but I just want to make sure you guys understand. If somebody was to say, well, technically, Doug, the scapula would be a part of the kinetic chain too, I'm not going to disagree with you, but it doesn't help us in the real world. Right? In the real world, we're really just concerned about the shoulder joint because that's where the bicep crosses over, at least one head of the bicep. Um, so that's your definition of a kinetic chain. We have a couple of terms that are important when we discuss kinetic chains, and those two terms are distal and proximal. Now, the easiest way to remember this is just remember that distal. What's the word, right? That sounds like distal. Well, I always remember distance. Distance. So further away, right? Omar, isn't that what you're thinking, right? So I think distance. Distal is that part. The kinetic chain has two parts to it. On the human body, you have a part that's closest to your torso, your midline, and a part that's furthest away, right? Remember what I said. For us, as personal trainers, dealing with basic exercise performance, we make it really simple. It's your arms or it's your legs. And basically, your arms are attached at the shoulder. So that's going to be one part of the kinetic chain generally. And then the fingers or the hands are going to be another part of the kinetic chain, right? So we simply say that, well, there's two ends. There's the one that's closest to the body and the one that's furthest away from the torso or midline of the body. And that's where the words distal and proximal come into play. I did not invent the terms, so don't be upset at me that you got to remember proximal and distal. Just remember distal, distance. So that's the distal component of the kinetic chain is the part of the kinetic chain that is furthest away from the midline of the body. And again, guys, simple. Hands and your feet. If you can tell me an exercise, now I get it. If you want to do like neck exercises, don't do those anyway. You know what I'm saying? Put your head. Yeah, you guys ever use those? You got to put a pad up against your head and you can push your head like this. They have machines like that you can actually use at health clubs. That's about the biggest waste of 6 square feet of space in a gym. But that's just my opinion. It doesn't amount to anything. But I guess if you're just training your neck or whatever, that's the distal, and that's the I don't even know. So we worry about the hands and the feet. So the distal describes that part of the kinetic chain furthest away from the midline of the body. Now, again, that does sound a little academic, right? But in general, the hands or feet are the distal ends in kinetic chains for most exercises. Come up with an exercise. Tell me an exercise. Any exercise that you do in the gym. Any exercise that you do that involves the major muscle groups, the chest, the back, the shoulders, bis, tris, quads, hamstrings, calves, whatever. And for the most part, that's going to be correct. It's simply your hands and simply your feet. Now, there are some right issues related to using certain pieces of equipment where that might not be the case. And just since I'm talking about it, I'll give you a great example. Have you all ever gotten on one of those deltoid machines where you put your arms in and you hold your hands and you lift your arms out like this? Have you all ever seen those? Yes. Technically, would my hands be the distal component of the kinetic chain?
No, elbow.
No, why not? because I'm pushing with my elbow. Technically, my hands and my wrist and my forearm have nothing to do with participating in that exercise. They're just there because they're connected to my elbow. But if I'm just pushing my elbow up and out, like on one of those machines, so that's what I was saying. 99.9% of the time, it's your hands or your feet. But if you want to get technical, yes, you could say that, well, certain machines do not have the hands or the feet. All right, how about for the lower body? Remember, I said the feet are generally going to be the distal. What if you're doing a? We used to use these all the time, many years ago. Inner and outer thigh machines. Have y'all ever used those? Where you sit down in the machine and your knees push out or pull in? Well, let me ask you a question. Are your feet a part of the kinetic chain in that exercise? And the answer is no, because it's your knees that end the kinetic chain, and that's where you're pushing and pulling from. I hope that makes sense. In other words, your knee, your lower leg, your ankle, and your foot don't participate in the movement whatsoever. They're just there for the ride. You're actually using the strength of your hip abductors in this case, right? Outer thigh abductors to do the movement. So technically, yes, you could argue, and I would not have a problem if you argued with me about that. But for the most part, 99.9% of the time, it's always going to be the hands or the feet are the distal ends in a kinetic chain. And why am I beating this? Why am I beating this dead horse, right? Well, it's because when I get to the next slide, it will make more sense. So the proximal part then is what? It's the opposite. It's the part of the kinetic chain that's closest to the midline of the body. All right. So it describes that part closest to the midline. Generally, the shoulders, shoulder girdle, right? Hips, pelvis, spinal column, and the sternum, right, which is the middle part of your chest, are the proximal ends in kinetic chains in most exercises. Okay? You guys with me? When we talk about kinetic chains, we're talking about joints and joint segments, not the muscle. We don't want to include the muscle on this. It's muscles work over the joints, but this is a mechanical concept, biomechanical, basically. Does that make sense, everybody? Give me a thumbs up if that makes sense, right? Okay, so for instance, during a lateral raise, the shoulder joint, shoulder girdle are closest to the midline. And by the way, the shoulder and the shoulder girdle are generally closest to the midline of body, no matter what we're doing. But in this case, we're basically saying the distal is the hand and the proximal is the shoulder. So everybody got that? Okay. So this then allows us to discuss the true importance. Remember, this slide just gives us some sort of academic biomechanical background. This slide helps us to understand the real world of exercise performance. Y'all get this? This is where we discuss what are known as open or closed chain kinetic movements. Open kinetic chain movements, closed kinetic chain movements. All right, without saying it, give me a thumbs up if y'all know what open and closed kinetic chain means. How many of y'all know it? Bina, you know it, right? Terry, you understand it? Yes. Well, let me make it as simple as I can do this. In an open, and you got to memorize this, by the way. This is like rote memorization. You need to be able to say an open kinetic chain movement is when the distal end of the kinetic chain moves in time and space, but the proximal end is stationary. A closed kinetic chain movement is the opposite. It's when the distal end of the kinetic chain doesn't move, but the proximal part of the chain does. How do I make this easy? An open chain movement, 99.99% of the time, is going to be the hands are moving. Whatever exercise, pick an exercise, and then determine whether it's open or closed chain. Give me any exercise. And if the hands are moving and the body is not moving, so I'm sitting down or even standing, doesn't matter, and my arms are doing something, my hands are moving in time. Can everybody see that my hands are moving? This is absolutely ridiculous that I have to ask you this. Yeah, there you go, Bina. See? If my hands are moving during the exercise, come on, lateral raises, shoulder presses, bench press, dumbbell press, rows for your back, bent over rows, pull down. It doesn't matter if the hands are moving and the body is stationary. That movement or that exercise is an open kinetic chain movement. Yeah, I want to beat down this concept so you guys, once we take that sort of next step and understand the importance of it, a closed chain movement, and again, this can be, I guess, somewhat confusing, but a closed chain movement means that the hands or the feet. So I'm making it simple for you, right? Just remember, 99% of the time, it's the hands or the feet. If they're moving, open chain. If they're not moving, but in general, the body, the torso, right? The torso or the entire body, whatever it is, if the body is moving, but the hands are stationary or the feet are stationary, we call that a closed kinetic chain movement. So everybody got that? Pretty straightforward, yeah? So what would be examples of closed kinetic chain movements? Well, obviously push-ups, squats, pull-ups. Now, and I think for the most part, that's easy to understand. If I'm doing a push-up, what's moving? What part of my body is moving? My torso. My body is going up and down. My hands are stationary on the ground. What is a complementary movement that's open kinetic chain that works the same muscles? It would be a dumbbell or a bench press. Yes? So I can use a closed or open chain movement to train the same muscles. Yes? Got that? When I do bench presses, what am I training? What's the agonist? The true agonist is the pectoralis major. Yes, the delta working. Yes, whatever. But the pectoralis major is the agonist, and that is the primary muscle involved in a bench press. What happens when I do a push-up? It's the same thing, right? Isn't my chest, my pecs, my pectoralis major, isn't that the primary or agonist during the movement? And the answer is yes. So open kinetic chain movements have complementary closed kinetic chain movements. Some do, not all, but some do as well. Another example of a complementary open and closed kinetic chain scenario would be what? Pull-ups. How many of y'all do pull-ups? I can't do them anymore because I have no strength to pull myself up anymore. But I used to. All right. So I'm going to tell you, yes, I used to be able to do pull-ups. Terry, you know that. There was a day. There was a day when I could do them. What is the complementary open chain movement? Because remember, pull-ups are closed. Does everybody understand that pull-ups are closed kinetic chain movements? Yes? Why? Because you're holding onto a unmoving bar and you're pulling your body up and down. Hands aren't moving, but your body's moving up and down, and you're training your, again, we'll use the single agonist, the latissimus dorsi. Lots of other muscles working, obviously, but latissimus dorsi is the primary mover. The complementary exercise from an open kinetic chain perspective would be what? Pull downs. Does that make sense? I can do a pull up, I'm training my lats. I can do pull downs, right? But now my hands are moving, but my torso is stationary. Does that make sense to everybody? And no, don't do them behind the neck. But I guess we'll talk about that at some later time. Never do pull downs behind the neck. They're always to the front. Same thing with shoulder presses, just so you guys know. Don't do shoulder presses behind the neck. I know Arnold used to do them back in the 1960s, and don't do those guys. Okay? Everybody understands the difference, open and closed kinetic chain. Why is this important? And the answer is, again, there's a sort of a technical, mechanical reason why we do probably both these type of exercises for the same muscle. And by the way, it really does depend on your client, because I don't know many clients that I've ever had over the years that could do pull-ups, right? That's why they're clients because they're detrained. They're not doing pull-ups. They're definitely not doing, wide grip pull-ups. So we opt for open chain movements for the lats, like rows and pull downs. You get it? So when we talk about open and closed kinetic chain movements, we have to ask ourselves a question. Why make the differentiation? Does it matter if I do a push-up versus a bench press? And the answer is absolutely. And I've given you the reason right here. So open chain movements where like the hands are moving or the feet are moving in time and space involves now look at these. Look at what I wrote here. Involves stress patterns associated with shearing forces at the joint. As soon as you see or hear the word shearing, what do you think of? Alexa?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Why is behind the neck pull downs detrimental?
I was waiting for somebody to ask me that. All right, I'll take one side trip for you. The reason is because you are externally rotating the humerus. So you've already put your shoulder joint into a compromised, mechanically compromised position. And now with your external rotation, because remember, if I do shoulder presses using a bar, for instance, to the front, what do I have to do? I've got to kind of lean back a little bit to make sure it doesn't, knock me in the chin, right? So have to actually just horizontally adduct my shoulder a little bit to allow it to come down. Now, if I go to the back, what do I have to do? I have to lean forward and I have to externally rotate the shoulder more than if I was doing it to the front. Internal rotation, external rotation. Can everybody see that? Okay. As soon as you externally rotate the shoulder, you've put it into a mechanically compromised position, i.e., you can hurt your shoulder doing that. That's just an external rotation. Now you're using resistance and you're going through abduction and adduction. So now that you've added this new kinesiological component to the movement, you're putting unnecessary or undue stress on the actual shoulder joint. Are you going to get hurt doing it? Probably not. I used to do them all the time. Um, but what we don't want to do is we don't want to put our clients into any compromised position. And the question is always, well, why do them if you don't have to? And the reality is you don't have to do behind the neck presses. There's no law that says when it's shoulder day, Alexa, you better go do those shoulder presses behind the neck, right? The shoulder press police are not going to come after you if you don't do behind the neck shoulder presses. Don't worry about it. So we always opt for the most efficient, most effective, least potentially injurious to our clients. So we throw things like behind the neck presses, we throw them out because we don't need them. Upright rows, we throw those out. You don't need those, right? You can do everything you need with just straight dumbbell presses. And by the way, guess what I can do with dumbbells? I can internally rotate my wrist to get into the perfect position. I can't do it with a barbell, but I can do it with dumbbells. So does that help?
Yes.
That was a very quick explanation of that. So what is it about open and closed kinetic chain movements then that give us, reasons to or not to do certain exercises? And here is the answer. Open kinetic chain movements involve what are known as shearing forces. In other words, joints. And I'm going to use my left fist and my right palm to demonstrate shearing forces. This is a shearing force. You see how I'm scraping the joint up against the inside of that concave part? Does everybody see that? Versus rotational forces like this. So this is rotational, right? And then this is a shearing force. So there's shearing forces associated with open chain movements. That is the technical, I guess you could say technical reason. So there is hang on one second, guys. Hold on 1 second. Hmm. Are you guys hearing that? Okay, good. All right, let me get back to here. I had a slight interruption there. Okay, so you have shearing forces, which are potentially dangerous um, to the joint. That's the easiest way to put it. It's potentially dangerous. You could injure the joint potentially. I'll give you an example. How many of y'all do dumbbell presses when you're training your chest? You ever do dumbbell presses? Like I like to use a bar, but I'll also use dumbbells. Have you ever done dumbbell flies? Give me a thumbs up if you've done dumbbell flies. Do you like doing dumbbell flies? Why not, Alexa? Because they hurt. Well, that's not the real reason. The problem with dumbbell flies is that the amount of shearing force on the shoulder is significantly higher when you let that dumbbell way out here and you're increasing the overall torque on the shoulder. That's why I never do dumbbell flies with clients. I don't recommend anybody do dumbbell flies at all because it's the potential. Because I'll have every bodybuilder right on YouTube saying, "You don't know what you're talking about." Right? I do them all the time. And I sit down and go, whatever. Okay, you do whatever you want to do because you ain't paying me for training anyway, so I really don't care what you do. But the science is the science, and the mechanics is the mechanics. So the point is that open chain movements have a lot of shearing, potentially damaging shearing forces on the joint versus closed chain movements. And what do we know about closed chain movements? And here it is. Emphasis is on joint stabilization through compressional stress. Why is this? Well, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Instead of having these shearing forces, there's compressional stress because your torso, while you're doing the movement, is applying force versus just the weight of the dumbbell applying force on the muscle. Now I have the entirety of my body providing a compressional force component that I do not have with open chain movements. So, for the most part, it's really simple. Open chain movements have the potential to cause more damage, quote, more damage to a joint potentially than closed chain movements. Can you hurt yourself doing closed kinetic chain movements? Well, duh, of course you could. But the amount or the potential for damage or stress, undue stress on the joint is significantly lower. The other thing, of course, is that closed chain movements like push ups and squats require more balance, a more balanced element to it. By the way, we're not saying don't do open chain movements. Obviously, we would never say that. But what we are saying is that once you understand that open chain movements, these are all the exercises you do, guys. This is exercise performance. Bench press, curls. Every exercise you do is going to generally be, for the most part, open kinetic chain movements, which is why you have to be very, very careful. That's why, like I said, I can do open kinetic chain movements safely. I can do my pull downs to the front. I can do my shoulder presses, not to the rear, but to the front. Because anytime I do these movements, open chain movements in improper mechanically positioned scenarios, the potential for injury or the potential for an inflammatory response is increased. Does that make sense? Ainsley, go ahead.
I was just wondering, it says here that for open chain movements,
Mhm.
muscles can be isolated during the
Yes,
exercise or performance. Is this like a main benefit of open chain movements, or is it just another characteristic?
absolutely. That's a
Okay.
great that's a great point because what does it say in the closed chain? Generally, closed chain movements involve multiple joints.
Yeah.
And so
Oh,
you are correct. One of the nice things about an open chain movement is I can use a little bit of weight.
yeah.
Remember, the reason I can't do pull-ups anymore and my clients could never do pull-ups is because I'm old and I'm too heavy now. And I got injuries all over the place. So even if I wanted to do a pull-up, I can't do pull-ups. Well, I need something to train my lats, don't I? So what now I can shift over to the obvious exercises, which is going to be open chain pull downs, for instance. And yes, I know there are machines where you can put your knees and you can do a pull up and sort of right unload your weight. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? You can unload your weight, and those are great. Those are fine. I don't, honestly, I don't recommend them. It's just not my thing to do it, but I don't think there's any problem with them. So, yes, Ainsley, right. If I'm going to train my biceps, if you're a bodybuilder, I do recommend pull downs, heavy pull downs to train your biceps. Great exercise. On the other hand, I'm not going to have my 55-year-old female client never worked out before. I'm not going to have her doing heavy pull downs for her biceps. No, what am I going to do? She's going to do 5 pound dumbbell curls.
Yeah.
And so the
Yeah.
open chain movement concept or using open chain for that scenario as an isolation is warranted. Absolutely. You got athletes, Terry's got athletes he deals with. Closed kinetic chain movements are going to be really, really helpful for them. Also from the perspective of what type of athlete are you dealing with? Some athletes, to be honest with you, I never had certain track and field athletes do any of the exercises you guys are doing. I didn't have them do a lot of these exercises. They did a lot more structured training that would involve either closed kinetic chain movements like push-ups, things like that, and squat, squat jumps and things like that. A lot more to it. But the idea is that I would use every client as an individual and make that determination. But that's kind of off the point. The general understanding, Ainsley, is that yes, isolation movements easier to use less weight, changing the weights, things like that, versus closed kinetic chain movements, which are also important to do. By the way, guys, I always recommend that you do push-ups, right, along with other training, open chain movements for the chest, for instance. Does that make sense? Okay. Um, any questions before I let you all go? Any questions about this material? Bina, yes.
What is an ancillary?
Ancillary means something additional.
Ancillary?
Yeah, ancillary means
Additional.
something additional.
Okay,
Okay?
ancillary muscle, ancillary joints.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
So the additional part of that of I think I wrote it
Additional.
was the
Okay.
kinetic chain. Okay? So guys, you understand we do both type of exercises for our clients. We're going to lean more towards for isolation type of training, Ainsley, obviously. We're going to stay away from those open chain movements that put a very high or excessive load or torque on a particular joint. Again, it depends on
Right.
the exercise, okay? Any other questions? No? Guys, I appreciate you coming on board. Listen, if you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so. We are more than happy to help you out and answer any questions if you have any in the comment box below. Just let us know. Have a great weekend, guys. We'll see you next week. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
guys. That's my break. I'm able to make an edit break when I do that. So just so you know, I have no idea how to edit. I can't even edit it when I just get in here. I got to wait till I put it on YouTube before I can edit it. So it's the way it goes. Was that helpful?
Yeah, I would like to review the ones that you haven't uploaded. So I don't know if you can send the link on our chat on our emails
They'll
because
they'll be in there. They'll be in there probably in a couple of days, Mina.
all right, okay.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
really
Don't
enjoyed
worry.
it. I think
They'll
it
all
is
be
it
in
kind
there.
of this is really helping because this kind of helps the what you're reading, you're listening